When the world goes quiet and the night takes over, the forgotten begin to speak. Welcome to the Voices of the Night, where every shadow has a story and every story chills you to the bone. A dense mist hung over the forest, thick and suffocating, as four travelers ventured deeper into its heart. They had heard the warnings, stories of those who entered and never returned. But they pressed on, driven by curiosity and the promise of adventure. The trees, towering and ancient, seemed to close in around them, their gnarled branches stretching like skeletal hands, casting long shadows on the uneven path. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of earth and decay. Every step they took was met with the soft crunch of dry leaves beneath their boots, and yet there was an eerie silence that enveloped them. No birds, no rustling of animals, only the occasional creak of the trees swaying in an unseen wind. As they ventured further, an unsettling feeling crept into their minds, a growing sense that they were being watched. It wasn't just the silence, it was something deeper, a presence that seemed to follow their every movement. They could hear faint whispers on the wind, words they couldn't quite make out, as though the trees themselves were speaking. One of them, Sarah, stopped suddenly, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. The others fell silent, straining to listen, but the whispers had stopped. "Let's keep moving," one of the men said, his voice steady but with a hint of unease. They pressed on, but the forest seemed to close in even tighter. The trees loomed taller, their dark branches twisting above them, blocking out what little light filtered through the mist. And the whispers began again, soft at first, like the rustle of leaves, then growing louder, more distinct. It was as if something was trying to warn them, or perhaps lure them deeper. Unbeknownst to them, their fate had already been sealed the moment they stepped into the forest. Something ancient and malevolent waited in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The whispers grew louder with each step, surrounding them, seeping into their minds like poison. The travelers quickened their pace, trying to outrun the unease that gripped their hearts. But the forest seemed to shift, the path before them twisting and turning in impossible ways. What had once been a clear trail now seemed to vanish into the thickening fog, replaced by a labyrinth of trees and shadows. Sarah, her face pale, glanced back, the fear evident in her eyes. "The path, it's changing," she said, her voice shaky. "We're not going the way we came." The others stopped, their nerves on edge. They turned around, but the way they had come was no longer visible. The forest had swallowed it, leaving them stranded in a maze of dense trees and thick fog. Every direction they looked seemed the same, an endless sea of twisted branches and suffocating mist. "There's no way back," one of the men muttered, his voice tight with panic. "We have to keep moving forward." The group pressed on, but the deeper they ventured, the more distorted the world around them became. The trees, which had once been tall and imposing, now seemed to lean in, their branches clawing at the air as if reaching for them. The ground beneath their feet felt unstable, as if the very earth was alive and shifting. And then, through the oppressive fog, they saw it. A figure standing in the distance. It was barely visible, but unmistakable, a silhouette of a person standing motionless, as though waiting for them. The figure's form was blurred, indistinct, like something from a bad dream, but there was no mistaking its presence. "Who is that?" one of the men whispered, his voice barely audible, but the figure did not respond. It simply stood there, watching them. The air grew colder, the silence more oppressive. The only sound was the faint rustle of leaves underfoot. As they neared the figure, it seemed to dissolve into the fog, vanishing without a trace. They stood frozen, confusion and fear settling in. The whispers around them had intensified, now a deafening chorus in their ears. But there was no one to explain what was happening. The forest had taken on a life of its own, and with it, their grip on reality began to slip. The travelers continued to press on, but the deeper they went, the more it became clear there was something wrong with the forest, something ancient and malevolent that had taken hold of the land. The trees seemed to whisper in a language they couldn't understand. their branches reaching for them like twisted fingers. The ground beneath them seemed to shift, as though the very earth was alive, guiding them deeper into the heart of the forest. Sarah's breath came in shallow gasps, her anxiety mounting. "We shouldn't be here. We're not supposed to be here." The others exchanged uneasy glances. The fog had thickened to the point where they could barely see beyond their own hands. Their sense of direction was gone, and every step forward felt like they were sinking deeper into a nightmare. Suddenly, the earth beneath their feet trembled. A low rumble echoed through the trees, and then a piercing shriek filled the air. The sound came from all around them, as if the very forest was alive, crying out in pain. "What is that?" one of them whispered, their voice cracking. Before anyone could answer, the ground split open before them, a dark, gaping chasm forming out of nowhere. It stretched wide and deep, its edges jagged and sharp. From within the abyss, they could hear the faint sound of something moving, something watching them. The air grew heavier, thick with an oppressive energy. The whispers grew louder, turning into guttural murmurs that echoed in their minds. It felt as though the forest itself was speaking, urging them to understand its ancient curse. Then, from the shadows, something emerged. It was a figure, tall and hunched, its body twisted and contorted in unnatural ways. Its face was a blur of darkness, its eyes two glowing, inhuman orbs that seemed to pierce through the fog. The creature's presence sent a wave of terror through the group. They tried to move, to escape, but their legs wouldn't obey. The creature's gaze held them captive, its power paralyzing them with fear. The whispers in their minds grew louder, drowning out all other sound, until they felt as though they were suffocating. With each passing second, the creature grew closer, and in the distance, they heard another voice, a woman's voice, faint and hollow, calling out from beyond the chasm. It was Sarah. Her voice, once filled with life, now sounded hollow, as if it had been swallowed by the forest itself. "Help me!" But they were already beyond help. The curse of the forest had claimed them, just as it had claimed so many others before them. They were no longer just lost. They were part of the forest now, bound to it for eternity. The travelers stood motionless, their bodies paralyzed by an unseen force. The creature that loomed before them, its grotesque form shifting in the mist, was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was neither fully human nor fully beast. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, its face a twisted mask of suffering and rage, and its eyes, those unearthly orbs, burned with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. The air around them grew thick with tension, each breath a struggle as the weight of the forest's curse pressed down on them. The whispers had intensified, now a cacophony of voices in their minds urging them to listen, to understand the truth of the forest. But the truth was a terrifying one. Once you entered, you never left. Suddenly, the creature moved, its steps slow and deliberate. With every inch it advanced, the air grew colder. The oppressive darkness deepened, and the sense of despair grew stronger. The travelers' minds raced, their hearts pounded, but no words came. There was no escape. One of them, the man who had tried to lead them earlier, managed to take a step back. His feet slipped on the damp earth, his face contorted in fear as he turned to flee. But the ground beneath him seemed to shift, as though the forest itself was alive, pulling him back into its depths. "Help me!" he screamed, his voice cracking with terror. But it was too late. Before anyone could react, the ground opened beneath him, and he was swallowed whole by the darkness. The sound of his cries echoed, then faded into silence. The remaining travelers froze, unable to move. The creature was now upon them, its eyes fixed on Sarah. She stepped back, her breath ragged, her heart hammering in her chest. "Please, don't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But it was too late. The creature reached out with long, clawed fingers, and as its touch grazed her arm, Sarah's body went stiff. A cold, unnatural numbness spread through her, her skin turning pale as though life itself was being drained from her. The creature's hollow gaze never wavered as it tightened its grip. Her body trembled, her mouth opening in a silent scream. And then, with a final sickening crack, Sarah's body twisted unnaturally, as if the forest itself had claimed her soul. Her body collapsed to the ground, a lifeless shell. The forest had taken her, just as it had taken so many others. The whispers rose in volume, filling their minds with maddening thoughts. The remaining travelers could feel themselves slipping, losing their grip on reality. The curse was complete. They were already fading, becoming nothing more than husks wandering the woods. They had become a part of the forest now, lost to its hunger forever. The mist thickened as the remaining 2 travelers staggered through the fog, their bodies growing weaker with each step. The forest was alive with unseen forces, its roots twisting, its branches reaching, its every sound filled with malice. The curse of the forest clung to them, draining their will to live, pulling them deeper into the abyss. They could hear Sarah's voice again, distant and faint, but somehow familiar. It was as if she was still with them, though they knew better than to believe it. She had become one with the forest, her soul consumed by its dark hunger. And now the forest was calling to them too. One of the travelers, a woman who had remained silent through the ordeal, collapsed to her knees. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. She reached out, her hand shaking as if grasping for something, anything to hold on to. "They're here," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "They never leave. The lost ones. They never leave." The man who remained, his face twisted with a mix of confusion and fear, stumbled forward. "We need to find a way out," he gasped, his voice shaking. But the fog had thickened, the trees closing in tighter, as if the forest itself was blocking their escape. Suddenly, the ground beneath them cracked open, revealing a chasm that stretched deep into the earth. From within, a cold, unnatural wind howled, carrying with it the faintest sound of whispers, distorted voices calling from the abyss. The woman screamed, her voice echoing through the forest as she reached out toward the chasm, her body racked with terror. "It's them! They're here!" Before the man could respond, she was pulled forward, her body dragged toward the dark void as though an unseen force had taken hold of her. She tried to scream again, but the sound was cut off as she was consumed by the darkness. Now alone, the man stood trembling in the silence that followed. The whispers had died down, replaced by an oppressive stillness that seemed to hang in the air like a death sentence. He could feel the forest closing in on him, its hunger pressing against his mind, his body, his soul. He tried to run, but his legs refused to move. The trees seemed to lean toward him, their branches stretching like claws. His vision blurred, and in the distance he saw a figure, a shadow standing at the edge of the chasm. It was Sarah's figure, distorted and broken, her body twisted in impossible ways. She was no longer a person. She had become one with the forest, a hollow shell of what she had been. The whispers returned, louder now, filling his ears with maddening thought. The forest was hungry, and it had claimed them all. He was next. With a final desperate scream, the man fell to his knees as the world around him dissolved into darkness. The forest had won. And as the last of the travelers faded into the abyss, the whispers echoed one final time, filling the empty forest with the voices of the lost, forever trapped within the cursed eternal grasp of the haunted woods. The mist had thickened to a suffocating density, and the once vibrant forest had turned into a desolate, twisted place where the boundaries of time and space no longer held meaning. The trees, gnarled and blackened, loomed like sentinels, casting long shadows that twisted and writhed in the fog. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground was damp and treacherous, littered with broken branches and fallen leaves. The curse of the forest had claimed the last of the travelers, but their presence lingered. Though their bodies were gone, their souls remained, trapped within the forest's grasp, forever bound to its darkness. They had become the hollow ones, lost and forgotten, their cries now nothing more than whispers carried on the wind. In the heart of the forest, a strange, unnatural silence prevailed. The whispers that had once echoed around the travelers were now distant, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The trees groaned, their branches creaking in the unnatural stillness, as if the forest was alive, listening for the return of the lost souls. And then, from the depths of the mist, came a sound, a soft, almost imperceptible cry. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, clearer, until it could no longer be ignored. It was the voice of Sarah, or what had once been Sarah, her tone hollow and desperate. "Help me," she whispered, her voice carried in the wind. The sound seemed to emanate from the very trees themselves, reverberating through the mist. It was the call of the lost souls, the ones who had entered the forest but never returned. Their bodies had long since decayed, their names forgotten, but their spirits still wandered, trapped between this world and the next, cursed to roam the forest for eternity. As the cry echoed through the woods, a faint light began to flicker in the distance. It was a small, dim glow, like the flickering of a candle in the vast darkness. It beckoned to anyone who might still be listening, an invitation to the lost souls who had wandered too long. But the light was no beacon of hope. It was the forest's trap, a lure for those who were foolish enough to follow it, guiding them deeper into the labyrinthine woods where they too would join the ranks of the Hollow Ones. As the light grew brighter, the forest around it seemed to warp, the trees contorting into twisted shapes. The ground beneath began to tremble, and the whispers rose to a deafening crescendo. It was as if the forest itself was preparing for the arrival of another soul to claim. The light was no longer faint, but blinding, filling the forest with an eerie glow that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was as if the very essence of the forest had condensed into this singular, unnatural beacon. The trees around it appeared to bend and twist, their limbs moving as though they were alive, reaching toward the light with an almost desperate hunger. The air grew thick, and the whispers returned, now loud enough to drown out all other sound. The trees seemed to whisper the names of the lost souls: Sarah, the man, the woman, and countless others who had entered the cursed forest, never to return. Each name echoed in the air, reverberating like a warning, a reminder that the forest would never let them go. From the glowing light, a figure slowly began to emerge, a shadow at first, its shape shifting and distorted, but as it came closer, it became clearer. It was Sarah, or at least the shell of what had once been Sarah. Her body was twisted, her eyes darkened, and her face was a pale, hollow mask of despair. Her once vibrant hair hung in tangled, matted clumps, and her clothes were torn and weathered. She stepped forward, her movements slow and unnatural, like a puppet whose strings had been pulled by an unseen hand. Her eyes, once filled with life, were now empty, a void where hope had once existed. She no longer spoke with the voice of a person, but with the voice of the forest, cold, detached, and full of malice. "You cannot escape," Sarah's voice echoed, distorted and hollow, as if it was coming from every direction at once. "None of you can. The forest claims all who enter." The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the trees seemed to close in, their branches creaking and groaning as if the forest itself was alive, feeding off the souls of those who had fallen victim to it. The whispers, now deafening, filled the air, drowning out all other sounds. Sarah's figure moved closer, her hollow eyes fixed on the remaining soul trapped within the forest's grip. Her hands reached out, twisted and gnarled, fingers like claws, and she beckoned them forward, pulling them toward the light. It was not a gesture of mercy, but a final, chilling embrace. The remaining soul stumbled backward, their heart racing with terror. They knew there was no escape, no way out. The forest had already claimed them, and they were nothing more than another lost soul, another victim of its hunger. They tried to turn, to run, but their legs refused to move, their body frozen in place by the forest's will. And as the light consumed them, they felt the forest's cold embrace. Their mind screamed, but their body was no longer their own. They were one with the trees, the roots, the mist. Their soul had been claimed, lost forever within the depths of the cursed forest. And as they faded into the darkness, the whispers quieted, The light dimmed, and the forest fell silent once again, waiting for the next soul to wander into its depths. The cycle would continue, the curse unbroken. As the forest grew stronger, its hunger never sated. And so our tale ends, leaving shadows that linger in the mind. If you survived tonight's story, leave a comment about what disturbed you most. Was it real? Was it fiction? Some questions are better left unanswered. Subscribe to hear more voices that whisper in the dark, and join me next time when I share another story that waits in the shadows. Until then, sleep well, if you dare. This has been Voices of the Night.